Welcome back to the Transfer Show. Now, one of the big deals, as we told you before the break, in this transfer window was Emile Smith Rowe's £34 million move from Arsenal to Fulham. And the man who masterminded it all was his agent, Jordan Wise. I'm delighted to say he's joined us in the studio now. Jordan, thanks so much for taking time out and joining us on the Transfer Show. I just want to ask you generically, before we specifically ask you about Emile, what you've made of the window so far as a whole, especially with the added complication, if you like, with profit and sustainability rules.
Yeah, I think it was kind of slow to get cooking, which is kind of commonplace when you see an overlapping of a big summer tournament in the Euros. And quite often you see, out of season managers that might have, certain targets. They've got the time to be able to go to the Euros, take closer view on some of their targets, and then post-tournament be able to advance conversations and escalate things to a transfer. And then on subject of PSR, obviously profit sustainability rules came in 2015, and before that FFP. So I think a lot of clubs are very well accustomed to keeping their clubs financially healthy. But they're, certainly over the last few years, finding new creative ways of being able to, explore, but potentially even exploit, like, those grey areas.
Creative ways and exploiting those grey areas. Just, if you can elaborate on that a little bit, what do you mean?
This is a transfer show, not the finance show, so I'll try and keep it as a top line. But, certainly hot press has been Chelsea Football Club over the last 2 years, amortisation, signing players on longer than traditional deals, 7 years, 8 years, and that enables them to stretch the transfer fees over that prolonged period, and thus reducing the annual financial impact on their bottom lines. And a second one, top line, would be forward financing. So let's say you have a Premier League club with 50,000 season tickets. Let's say the average price of a season ticket is £2,000. It's £100 million in revenues a year. Rather than waiting year on year for that £100 million to come in, they could have a conversation with their bank or another bank and look at ways in which they could forward them those revenues, or a proportion of those revenues. So let's take that example. Club generates £100 million a year, has a conversation with the bank, and they say, look, we'll put together a deal that sees us maybe contribute 80% over the 5 years. So £400 million. And what we'll do is, rather than you wait over the 5-year period, we'll pay it in 2 years, discount some interest, maybe 20, 30 million, and that enables the club to have, £300 million plus available to them to deploy in, however they best see fit, basically.
Wow.
But that's for another show.
You had a busy one. Let's go back to Emile Smith Rowe. We can see him in the background there. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline from when you get that first call from Edu, I guess, and they say, look, we'd allow Emile to go, and then how does that work, and then you end up at Fulham?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's common practice in the agency world or in any form of management, especially in football. Post-season, you'll have a catch-up with the club, maybe the coaching staff, maybe some senior management, and kind of reflect on the season. Definitely pushing conversations more often than not when your player maybe hasn't had as much game time as he would have liked. Obviously, in the example of Emile, played just one Premier League start. I think it was just under 350 minutes. So it's kind of obvious that a conversation needed to be had. And so really, conversation started there. And I think what's important to add is, from the beginning, there's never ever been any articulation from the club that, Emile was a player that they wanted to actively sell. There wasn't us knocking on the door saying, hey, we want to get the hell out of here. There was always just a recognition that, from a footballing perspective, he hadn't seen as much game time as he would have liked. He's obviously a top player, and that's been demonstrated over seasons in the past. And that there was an openness and a willingness that, if the right opportunities presented themselves through that process, there would be very strong consideration to, if certain boxes got ticked, that they would facilitate a deal.
What was Emile's reaction when you first told him about Fulham's interest?
I think from the end of the season and certainly post conversations with Arsenal, as I said, there was always that openness to kind of assess the market and see if there were any clubs who were maybe interested in Emile. And of course, it goes without saying, it's obvious why there would be an attraction towards going to a club like Fulham. We could spend all day talking about it. Got a great manager. It's a London-based club. They play a very attractive attacking style of football. But outside of that, as I said, you're not making any firm decisions off the back of one call. Clubs are always putting the feelers out to gauge your interest as much as establishing a recognition that they're interested in your player. But we were definitely open-minded around the pros and the cons of, whether it be staying in the Premier League, going to Europe. You just saw, obviously, Conor go to Madrid. That will have with it some pros and some cons. So you're constantly, assessing what it could look like if you went there. And again, as I said, it's the beginning of the process. So there's many more conversations to have. And once you've got the blessing of the club, speak to the manager and understand exactly what the project is.
Wasn't just Fulham, though, interested, was it? Can you tell us about the other clubs that showed some interest?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some were well documented. There was strong consideration from both the Premier League and from Europe. And the most important element across all of it that was really a main driver was, what would it look like in terms of game time? 2 seasons, I think only 2 Premier League starts over the 2 seasons. And so really that was the main objective is whatever the next project looked like, where did he sit in terms of game time?
Jordan, the Arsenal fans love him. They've made a song with him and Saka. He's one of their own. So when you do a transfer deal, I'm guessing it's difficult enough trying to get a transfer over the line. But how much more difficult was it because of the emotion attached to this particular deal?
It's an interesting question. I think in terms of the process, of course, look, Arsenal fans have a really strong affinity towards Emile and the other way around. And that doesn't just sit with Arsenal fans. I think senior management at Arsenal obviously have a very strong affinity towards Emile. If anything at all, I would say it maybe made it easier. Not in terms of actually facilitating the transfer in the end, but in terms of the process, there wasn't an awareness all the way through from Arsenal that, as I said, if certain boxes got ticked and it transpired that there was something there or multiple options there that were to be considered strongly, that there was a right way to do it. So they were very conscious of the narrative around, letting one of their own ultimately go. But in the end, he went. And I think when you look at all of the criteria that needs to get ticked to see a transfer happen, one of those was acting in the best interest of Emile.
Can you give us an insight into those conversations? I know, of course, they are private between the player and the manager, but can you give us a taster of what Edu and Mikel said to Emile? And when you look at the sort of situation, how tough a decision was it for him? Did he need convincing that actually you need to leave Arsenal? Because when you leave a club like Arsenal, it's only one way, and that's very rarely up.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, obviously, as I said, there was never any sentiment from the club that he was a player that they wanted to move on. Emile was a highly valued member of the team that could contribute at any given moment, whether that be off the bench or whether that be, thrown in the deep end in his first start and only start of the season against Luton and picking up man of the match. He was always available, always ready, and he was, always very much fully focused on giving his most to Arsenal Football Club last season. And as I said, I through these conversations, it wasn't one conversation at the beginning. It was, over a prolonged period over the course of the summer, that as momentum built in conversations with other clubs, it got to the point where it was clear that this was probably going to serve the best interest of everybody.
Brilliant.
Just, was there ever any point where you thought this isn't going to happen? And what was the single biggest challenge when you were trying to do this deal?
Oh, there's always lots of challenges in a deal. I think it goes in business in general, nothing is done until ink is on paper. I don't think this deal or any other deals in the football world are any different. It's a results-orientated business. I think now there's just as much scrutiny on senior management off the pitch, if you think about sporting directors, technical directors, etc., as there is the managers and the players on the pitch. No one remembers the deals that didn't happen. They only remember the deals that did complete. No one remembers who finishes second or lost the cup final, just who won it. So it was very much, there was a consistent communication process all the way through with different flows of momentum, but nothing's ever done until it was ink on paper.
Jordan, we could talk to you for a while longer, but time has caught us up. So thanks so much for joining us on the Transfer Show.
My pleasure. Thank you.